You know how sometimes when you're trying to go to sleep and your brain makes you think of the most terrifying thing possible? Well, for me, I'm always reminded of the hundreds of people who have gone missing in national parks and have just never been found. Like, what do you mean someone can be here 1 second and the next they are gone forever? I'm specifically talking about the disappearance of Dennis Martin. And if you want to lose sleep tonight, stick around and let's talk about it. This is Dennis Martin. He was only 6 years old and just 6 days shy of his 7th birthday when he disappeared in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. He was this energetic, mischievous little boy who loved the outdoors. On Father's Day weekend in 1969, Dennis, along with his older brother Douglas, their dad William, and their grandpa Clyde all took off for what was supposed to be a fun camping trip celebrating the dads. They took off for the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and this Father's Day weekend camping trip was a tradition for the Martin family, but this would be the very first time that Dennis would be camping overnight. Every year prior, he'd been just a little bit too young to tag along, but this year, being 6 years old, almost 7, he finally got to go, and he was really excited about it. So the first day of the trip started off great. The Martin family hikes from Cades Cove to Russell Field, which is a pretty big hike, and that's where they set up camp for the first night. They woke up early the next day and hiked to Spence Field, which is near the Appalachian Trail. And at this point, things were still going good. The family picked this spot to set up camp because there were a few other families camping in the area who all had kids. So all the kids kind of bonded together and pretty much just spent the whole time playing together. At around 4:30 p.m. on June 14th, 1969, Dennis and his brother were playing hide and seek with some of the other kids when they got this fun idea to try and scare all of their parents. They all decided to split up and hide in the bushes surrounding the trail so that when their parents walked by, they could jump out and hopefully scare them. So Dennis made his way behind a nearby bush, but nobody really thought that he would actually be able to scare anyone because he was wearing this bright red t-shirt, so you could easily see him behind the bushes. Now, the kids thought that they were all being sneaky, but Dennis's dad William could all see them crouched behind the trees. At first, he even saw Dennis, but over the next 5 minutes or so, one by one, the kids would jump out from behind the bushes, and slowly but surely, all of the kids returned back to the campsite. All except for one. For some reason, Dennis never jumped out from behind the bush, and he never made it back to the campsite. Literally within minutes, he was gone. His dad tried not to freak out, but Dennis was nowhere to be found, so he immediately started searching for him. He ran down the trail that they were on for nearly 2 miles, at least until the point where there was no way that Dennis could have made it that far by himself on foot. William searched for any sign of his son and screamed Dennis's name until his voice gave out, but Dennis seemingly vanished into thin air. Since this was 1969, there weren't just cell phones lying around in case of an emergency like this, so he had his dad, Clyde, so Dennis's grandpa, hiked the 7 miles back to the Cades Cove Ranger Station to get help. Dennis's disappearance was of immediate concern because the location where he disappeared is super dense and has a lot of steep slopes and ravines. There are also a lot of wild animals who inhabit the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. You have copperhead snakes, bears, feral hogs, and bobcats. So needless to say, a massive search was launched right away. What's crazy, but also nice to see, is that the National Guard and even the U.S. Army Green Berets were brought in, who conducted their own investigation and search. This was a huge search though, because you had those 2 teams come in, but you also had the park rangers and 1,400 volunteers. And in addition to that, authorities also brought in tracking dogs and used helicopters. The search for Dennis to this day is the most extensive in the park's history, and by June 22nd, so 1 week later, 56 square miles had been searched. No stone was left unturned, but even so, no trace of Dennis was ever found. What didn't help though was that right after Dennis disappeared, a huge thunderstorm came in, which let down 3 inches of rain in just a matter of a couple of hours. This washed out all of the trails and caused nearby streams to flood. And of course, this also meant that the rain washed away any potential clues left behind. And overall, it just made the search super difficult. The temperature dropped to 50 degrees Fahrenheit the night Dennis vanished. So as the days went on, it seemed more and more unlikely that he would be found alive. It just seems like everything that could have went wrong did, which is so sad. But authorities were able to find one thing that really stood out before the rain completely washed it away: a set of footprints. More specifically, a set of footprints starting from near where Dennis disappeared, leading all the way to a stream, and then they stopped. What's super odd though is that the tracks indicated that one foot was barefoot, while the other foot was wearing an Oxford, which was the type of shoe that Dennis was wearing. Authorities tried brushing this off, saying that the footprint belonged to a Boy Scout who was helping in the search for Dennis, but a retired park ranger who was also helping in the search said no. That's not true at all. He believed these prints belonged to Dennis because, for one, the tracks were not a part of the group's search, and two, none of the Boy Scouts who were out searching were barefoot, so that theory didn't even make sense. Search efforts continued for a while, but sadly, after finding absolutely no trace of Dennis, the search was officially called off on September 14th, 1969. It's really sad to me that he spent his 7th birthday out there all alone and lost. But shortly after his disappearance, people started coming forward about weird things they had seen in the forest around the time Dennis disappeared. One was a man named Harold who was camping with his family about 5 miles away from where Dennis went missing. So taking it all the way back to that day, roughly an hour after Dennis disappeared, Harold and his family heard a blood-curdling scream coming from the forest. Shortly after, they saw a rough-looking, unkempt man who they described as almost feral hiding among the trees. Then the man took off running up the trail near where they heard the scream coming from. And what really stood out to them was that this man was carrying a bright red piece of clothing over his shoulder, and it looked very similar to the shirt Dennis was wearing when he went missing. Harold told the police all of this, but ultimately, authorities didn't have enough evidence to link this sighting to Dennis's disappearance. Given the rough terrain and the fact that this was about 5 miles away from where Dennis was last seen, and given the short amount of time that had passed from when he disappeared to when this scream was heard, police don't believe this is connected, although it is very strange. Unfortunately, this sighting really sparked some crazy conspiracy theories, like cannibalistic feral people who have gone off the grid living deep in the Smokies. People say that these feral people attack anyone who comes too close to them, and somehow this crazy conspiracy theory got lumped in with Dennis's disappearance, which is sad and honestly really hurtful. Other out there theories include cryptids having taken him. The Smoky Mountains have been heavily rooted in folklore for such a long time. Some people claim to have seen Bigfoot, to have heard weird noises and screams deep in the woods, and to have seen unexplainable, creepy lights. Again, this was somehow lumped into Dennis's disappearance, and some people actually think that he was taken by something, not someone. Over the years, Dennis's dad held out hope that his son would be found, and he even offered a $5,000 reward for any information. That might not seem like a lot to you, but that's equivalent to about $44,000 as of last year, and he offered that alone, like that was his personal money. A few years after this, someone was in the area where the footprints thought to belong to Dennis were found. He claimed to have discovered the scattered skeletal remains of a small child, but he decided to keep this to himself until 1985. His reasoning for doing this was because he had been in the area that day hunting for ginseng, which I guess is either illegal or largely frowned upon. He said he was too scared to come forward for all those years in fear that he would get in trouble. But when he did tell authorities, they went out to the exact location of this supposed discovery. But sadly, nothing was ever found. I'm not sure if I totally believe this guy or not, but if he was telling the truth, it just sucks that he waited so long. Because all sorts of things could happen to bones like that out in the wild, especially over long periods of time. One of the biggest reasons people think Dennis was never found was because of the sheer size of the search party. Remember, over 1,400 people showed up to help, which on one hand is amazing, and I'm sure the Martin family was super thankful. But on the other, authorities say with that many inexperienced people, they could have easily stomped over potential evidence and destroyed it without even knowing. When it became clear that no one was going to find him, the National Park Service amended its policy on searches for missing people. Instead of trying to maximize the number of searchers, they now focus on smaller search parties of trained professionals. I 100% agree with that change, but in this specific case, I find it so weird how there were that many people there searching for him pretty quickly after he disappeared, yet no one found a single thing. To this day, we don't know what really happened to Dennis Martin, but there are a few theories. Theory number one is that he got lost accidentally while trying to find a better hiding spot that day and just died of exposure. danger. Or maybe he fell and got hurt, but he was just too deep in the woods or somewhere in a deep crevice where he was just never found. Park rangers think that if this is the case, he likely didn't survive long after the first day with the weather conditions, and they all think that this is the most probable theory. Theory number 2 is that Dennis was attacked by a wild animal and was carried off somewhere. I mean, we've already established that some dangerous animals do live where he went missing, but I feel like some sort of evidence would be found if this happened, like torn clothing, blood, or things like that. But nothing like this was ever found. And finally, theory number 3 is that Dennis was met with foul play, that maybe he was abducted and taken out of the park by a stranger. The Martin family really believes this theory, like it's the only one that makes sense to them. I mean, that would explain why there was absolutely no evidence left behind, and it would back up the odd sighting of the unkept man that Harold saw. But I don't know. It's cases like this that really keep me up at night because I know that the Great Smoky Mountain National Park is huge, and all it takes is one little mistake or wrong turn to go missing. But it just really seems like Dennis vanished into thin air. And I truly just don't have an explanation on what happened to him. But it's now been 57 years, and whatever really happened to Dennis that day in the wilderness remains a mystery.